If the election was a 400-metre race in the Olympics, then all of the runners are now rounding the final corner and coming on to the home straight. And nowhere is that hitting home more than here in Clacton, where the countdown to the general election on Thursday is now measured in hours and not days. This is a crunch seat this year because really it's Nigel Farage's last chance to get into Parliament as the leader of the Reform Party. And 2 polls so far, including one just for The Sun, have found that Nigel Farage is well and far ahead in the polls, 27 points in front of his Conservative rival Giles Watling in one of those surveys. But are those polls correct? Reform UK has never been a big electoral force. This is the first election it's actually stood as Reform UK. In the last election as the Brexit Party, it didn't even field candidates in half of the seats in the country. So how easy is it to poll when you don't know what sort of backing a party has? And that's why we're here in Clacton. This is the coastal Essex seat. It's the only seat that UKIP ever won, and it's the reason that Nigel Farage chose to run here in his 8th bid to get to Parliament. And we'll be taking the temperature of normal people around this constituency to see exactly who they might return on July 4, and if those polls are as correct as they seem. So how do you feel about Nigel Farage making a comeback?
I think he's a bloke who never seems to go away, to be honest. He just seems to pop up. I don't know quite what his connection is with Clacton, but hey, I don't know. He's got some radical policies, but he doesn't really say how he's going to pay for them all, should he ever get in, but it'd be interesting.
One of the polls has put Nigel Farage nearly 30 points ahead of the Conservatives, which would be a crushing victory.
It would be indeed.
From talking to your friends, your families, everyone around here, do you think that poll's right? Do you think he can really win by 30 points?
Oh yes, my family are down here today and they're voting Reform. Quite a lot are. Some of my family are still Conservative.
I think he's got a big following in Clacton, and I think he'd do well. But to be honest, he needs to follow these things through. I'm not quite convinced now. Last time I followed him and I did agree with what he was doing. But he let Carswell down. I think Reform will get in Clacton. So, yeah.
And do you think that if Nigel Farage is elected, do you think he will keep his promises this time?
No, I don't.
Or will he use it as
He'll just use
bigger
it.
ambitions?
Yeah, I think that's what his idea is, yeah.
I
I don't know why he's like that, really. He just needs to follow things through and, that will work. If he'd make a good Prime Minister, but he's got to prove himself.
Craig Mackinlay, you were the last person to beat Nigel Farage just over 9 years ago.
Yeah.
2 polls already have put him in front quite substantially in Clacton against Giles. What makes you think those polls are wrong?
Well, they did the same in South Thanet in 2015. They had Nigel ahead. So polls are, I can give you the spiel. They're just a poll. The real thing happens on Thursday. Unfortunately, a lot of it might have happened already with postal votes. But I'm here to support Giles because he's a local guy. He's not going anywhere. He's not using Clacton as a springboard, just as Nigel tried to use South Thanet as a springboard. I think he's trying to use Clacton. And the only difference between Nigel winning and losing here is 5 years. Because last time he was here was 10 years ago, when I was last here, when the UKIP sort of show came into town to support Douglas Carswell. Very different entity, of course. He was the local MP. But this time, Nigel's using Clacton, I fear, as just a springboard to get to Parliament, a place he's tried to get in so many times. Well, I think people realise that Reform are not going to be creating government. They might be lucky to get a seat or two around the country, or they may get none at all. So that's the big difference. Giles is part of a team. People in Clacton know they're electing someone who's going to be a building block of a potential government. I know polls aren't looking so great for us as Conservatives this time round, but we'll see on Thursday. But that's the big difference. It's not just a shout and a yarn and a manifesto on the back of a fag packet. This is real politics, delivering a country and a government and an agenda for the whole country. That's the big difference.
Right, well, Giles Watling, you've been behind in 2 polls now so far, including one for The Sun that put you 27 points behind Nigel Farage. Why do you think they're wrong?
Well, I think they're wrong because, purely and simply, this is an entirely new scenery. The polls can't reflect Reform. Reform has never stood in an election before. So this is like whole new territory. and you can do a straw poll. I tell you one thing, I've been knocking on doors for 3 weeks now, averaging 18,000 steps a day, and I'm not getting much pushback. Yes, they put up little flurries of posters everywhere, and there is obviously a hardcore reform vote here somewhere. But frankly, I'm not finding it. So there's two reasons why I don't think the polls are very accurate. And I'm really hopeful. But it's still going to be a close-run thing. Never complacent, but I still think I can take it.
And how much harder do you think you're sort of having to work then as a result of reform? I mean, the thing is that, as has been pointed out to us in other constituencies where Nigel Farage stood in the past, a lot of the time he's come in on a helicopter, landed, given a speech and flown back out again. And what sort of impact do you think that's having, the fact that he's not here on a daily basis?
He's not here on a daily basis. I'm doing what I always do on campaigns. I'm out every day in this area. I've been here since 1957, and I brought up my family here. I ran a business here. I mean, this place, this area is in my DNA, so I know it well. Nigel, on the other hand, has a much greater spend than I do, because although there are electoral rules about the amount we can spend, I'm just spending local money. I'm not getting hardly anything at all from the national spend, because the Conservative Party has to look at the entire nation. On the other hand, Nigel can use national spend, and he's focusing it on, I imagine, he's focusing on this area. And why not? He's the leader of the party and he wants to take this seat.
And you've not had that much support, as you say, then, from the national campaign to fend off Nigel?
No, because the party's got other things to focus on, like all the ministers, their seats and so forth, and it's a very difficult election. I understand that, but I like to think that my knocking on the door, you've just caught me as it happens, I've just come back from Thorpe the Circle where I've been knocking on the doors, and this morning knocking on the door, I didn't find one person who wasn't going to vote for me. And that's absolutely, on my daughter's life, the truth. I find it extraordinary. So, yes, I have met a few reform people. Yes, I've had the door slam. We get that, we're used to that. But about 3 or 4 times in the entire 3 weeks.
You get these big events where Nigel Farage rocked up. I was here when he launched his campaign here.
So was I. I came to just by here. Yeah, I was here.
Just by word. And it was about 800, 900 people who turned up. And with the greatest respect, and you're very well liked around here, I know. But, you're down here today. I know it's not an announced visit, and there's maybe 10, 15 people who've come out to say hi. I mean, he is a great deal more popular, again, with the greatest respect. Do you think that will translate at the ballot box? Or?
Well, okay, I came down here on that event, and 800 people. Yes, of course, he bussed his own people in. You have to ask where they came from. Are they local voters? I think not. He's got an interesting style of campaigning. It's presidential. It's saturation campaigning, and it's playing on a basic human desire, which is if you see a lot of people moving in one direction, you think, oh, that's good. That's got to be the direction to go in. So that is the herd mentality thing. And it works tremendously well. If I could have 5 minutes with everybody who's just following that herd, and I talk about what Nigel cares about Clacton. Does he care about Clacton? No. This is another stepping stone for him on a new path. We know he wants to go to America, and it was ironic that he did say that he didn't want to come to Clacton. He said, why should I want to spend every Friday in Clacton? And then his chum in New York got found guilty on 34 charges of felony, and 3 days or 4 days later he decided to stand in Clacton, having said he wouldn't. In fact, Piers Morgan asked him again and again, why aren't you standing? He said, I'm not standing, again and again on the television programme. And this is sheer opportunism. And what really upsets me, as a man of this area, is he's taking us for granted. He is just accepting, he thinks that he could just walk in here and get the votes and people won't think and he'll take it. But I think Clacton's better than that. People will think about it, and I stand on my record here of delivering.
One of the big things that's come up in the last week or so in the campaign is some of the comments made by people inside the reform campaign here in Clacton. How much has that come up on the doorstep so far, where people have seen what's happened?
Well, the biggest one has not been that, curiously. People have seemed very upset about his comments about President Putin, cozying up to Putin. He cozies up to Trump, who cozies up to Putin, and now Nigel's come out in support in a certain way of Putin. The comments that were appalling, that one of if it's all true, and I'm not privy to the information, but if all that's true, and there were 3 or 4 different supporters of Nigel Farage's there, then that is appalling. And Nigel Farage himself has said that is appalling. But he seems to attract that kind of he's poking at a wasp's nest, and it's a very dangerous game he's playing. And here's another thought, is that this kind of populism often happens when countries go through very difficult times. We've been through the pandemic, we've got an ongoing war in Ukraine, and populist leaders arrive. You get demagogues surrounded by acolytes holding rallies, not going to hustings. I accepted invitations to go to hustings. Nigel Farage is not going to hustings, so he's not talking to the people being asked questions, but he's holding one-way rallies. This is saturation politics. And you know, this is what my father and his generation fought against in World War II. Now, I'm not ascribing, I'm sure Nigel's a very nice guy, but it's the process, the way it's being done is frankly chilling.
I've got one more question for you. What happens if next Friday morning at about 4 o'clock you're in Clacton Town Hall and Nigel Farage does win? What do you do then? Will you keep fighting to return in 5 years' time?
No. I've made this promise on the doorsteps of Clacton. I either retire on July the 4th or I retire in 5 years' time. But there's more to do and I want to finish the job. I've brought £103 million in the last 3 years into this constituency and I want to see that spent properly. And I've worked really hard for this constituency. So I either retire July the 4th or in 5 years' time. And this is the promise I've made to people on the doorstep. This is the last time I shall bother you canvassing.
Giles Watling, thanks very much.
Pleasure.